I want to encourage you this morning, if you're desperate, to cry out to God. We often come together in a very artificial way, as if everything's okay. We're putting on our Sunday faces, though often our hearts are breaking. Are you with me this morning? I want you to cry out to God this morning if there's desperation in your heart. Don't be a Sunday Christian that sits there with your finery on, but those days have gone now. We don't come in our finery anymore. But cry out to God, because he's here and he's listening. Will you turn to the book of Corinthians, please? 1 Corinthians in chapter 1 and verse 20. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 20. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For Jews request a sign and Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, to the Jews a stumbling block and to the Greeks foolishness. But to those who are called both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. In the year 213 before Christ, a rather strange book was written. Some of you, one of you may be familiar with it. It was called The Sound Reckoner, and it was written by a rather strange character, and its object was to work out how many grains of sand it would take to fill the universe. That's true. It's called The Sound Reckoner. And the author was a Greek who lived in Syracuse on the island of Sicily. And he was a very clever character. And one day the Romans invaded Syracuse, which was defended so rigorously, they'd never seen a defense like it. They'd never seen weapons like it. For example, there were mirrors on the cliff, because Syracuse was a port city. There were mirrors on the cliff shining on the sun onto the sails of the Roman galleons, and they would burn up. And then as they came near to the shore, a great big set of teeth would come down over the cliff and lift the ships up and drop them down again. They'd never seen anything like it. And eventually the Romans were victorious, and the proconsul ordered that the inventor of these weapons must not be killed. However, a rank and file soldier later on saw this man on the beach doing equations in the sand, and he killed him. That man was Archimedes, the great mathematician. That's how he died. And before he died, he said this, give me a place to stand and a lever long enough, and I will move the world. He said, give me a place to stand and a lever long enough that I can put on a fulcrum, and I will move the world. Well, 200 years later, a lever was found. It was in the form of a tree. It was felled, and on it was nailed the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And it was a pivotal point of history that moved the world and is the explanation as to why we are here this morning. It has moved the world. Has it moved you? It's so wonderful in its power and in its wisdom that it's possible to transport men and women out of the kingdom of Satan into the kingdom of God. Hallelujah. It's possible for this cross and Jesus and this cross to transport a man and woman from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. It's possible by this cross to bring us under new management. I've told this story many times, and forgive me for those who've heard it before. It's a true story about the Salvation Army and a couple that were illiterate, and they lived in London, and they got saved in the Salvation Army. And if you've read the history of the Salvation Army, it's a wonderful history. And he went out to church, came back looking miserable, and his wife asked why, and he said, well, they'd got red tops on. She said, well, I'll get you a red top. So off he went, and again, and still came back miserable, and she said, what's the problem? And he said, well, they had writing on them. You know what they had on them in those days? Blood and fire. That's what the Salvation had on the back of their shirts. Now, she was illiterate, he was illiterate. She looked out of the window of the house and saw a man on a ladder painting a sign on a shop. So she copied that verbatim onto the back of his shirt, and he came back thrilled. You know what she'd written? Under new management. Hallelujah. They were thrilled about that in the Salvation Army. In fact, they said it was much better than theirs. That's what he told. That's what she told him. The cross, the message of the cross. Now, whose management are you under? You see, there's only two managers, actually. You're either under the management of Satan or you're under the management of God. Those are the two alternatives, and there are no more. Now, this church at Corinth, and I know I'm talking to a number of Bible students here, and you know these things so well, had awful problems. If you find a church without problems, well, don't join it, because you'll only add to the problem, make a new one anyway. If anyone's naive enough to think a church hasn't got problems, well, tough, because you'll discover and will have discovered that none of us are perfect. And we struggle and strive at times, but we must be rooted in the very Word of God. Well, now, this church was called out of a pagan and idolatrous culture, and it had a number of problems, and you'll remember some of them. And he immediately, Paul that is, identifies the first problem, which actually goes to the very root of the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. Because here's the problem. If the world doesn't understand the gospel, and it doesn't, that's awful. But if the church doesn't understand it, that's even more awful. And that is the problem in our day and age, I would suggest. The understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ, its true nature. And I want to suggest that the church has to keep returning to those things to make sure we are, I was going to say, on the same page with God. Forgive me, Lord, for putting it that way. But you know what I'm saying? We must understand these things. And the first thing he mentions is there are divisions, and you'll find it in chapter 1, verse 11. He says this, "Now I plead with you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you perfectly join together in the same mind and in the same judgment. For it has been declared to me concerning you that by those of Chloe's household, that there are contentions among you. Now I say this, that each of you says, I am of Paul, or I am of Apollos, or I am of Cephas, or I am of Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? Now, this was more than people having a preference over speakers. I've been in churches like that where, there are favorite speakers. I suppose that's inevitable in some ways, but it's much more than that. It's not that they were saying, well, I rather like Apollos' preaching. I rather like Cephas when he's preaching. I'll come along then. It was far, far worse than that. It was indeed very much more serious. In fact, so serious that if you look at the book of 1 Corinthians, you'll see the whole 4 chapters, the first 4 chapters, is devoted to this problem. In fact, in chapter 3, Paul says to them, you're just babes in Christ. I can't talk to you as mature people. You're just babes. You're embroiled in this matter of division. I mean, imagine it happening here. Well, I'm of this person and I'm of that person. And now, as you read on in those chapters, you keep coming across the words wisdom and wise. And I want to say again, this was not a personality cult. It was a complete misunderstanding of the message of the gospel and the true wisdom of God. And Paul sums it up in chapter 3, verse 18. Let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you seems to be wise in this age, let him become a fool that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, he catches the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. Therefore, let no one boast in men, for all things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos, or Cephas, or the word of life, or death, or things present, or things to come, all are yours, and you are Christ's, and Christ is God. Here's the crux of the matter. It was the wisdom of God versus the wisdom of man. That's what it was. It was the wisdom of the cross versus the wisdom of men. They'd confused the Christian gospel with mere philosophy. That's what they'd done. And you know what philosophy is? It's a kind of a futile, I'll be have to be careful in case anyone's got a degree in philosophy, but it's a kind of futile attempt to understand the world and understand how we tick. And of course, if you read any philosophy, they nearly always disagree among themselves. And there's nothing certain about it at all. But that's what they were looking at. It was, they might just have said, we're of Plato. Or we're of Aristotle. We're of this philosophy. Christianity for them was turning into a new kind of wisdom. It was turning into a new philosophy. Now, I'm sure these people had come to Christ, but they were departing. They were moving away. And this is why Paul is so strict in his words. They were moving away from the truth because there was much confusion. And Paul says in chapter 1, verse 17, but Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom of words, lest the cross of Christ be made of no effect. Paul was a wise man. He would have been head and shoulders above us all intellectually. If any man could have argued in a wise way, he could have done. He could have contended with the people of the day. He could have done that, but he chose not to. He chose to abandon that. And he said, if I add anything to this simple message, if I add anything to this message of Christ and crucified, I will nullify the gospel. That's what he said. It'll be made of no effect. Let's be clear, brothers and sisters, and we've sung it this morning. Salvation is from God. Amen. It's from God. It's God's power. In fact, you might say it's God's only wisdom. And please understand what I'm saying, as far as we're concerned anyway. And Paul says, don't boast in men, for all things are yours. Now, that word doesn't mean to brag, which we have in the English language. It's to place one's confidence. That's the meaning of the word. Don't place your confidence in men. Don't place your confidence in a man. You see this on the television, hordes of people coming along to hear a preacher. They're putting their confidence in a man. They hang on every word. And, Paul says, quotes Jeremiah, "He who boasts, let him boast in the Lord." That's it. Now, I told you the other day, I get a bit impatient when people encourage me to turn around and say hello to the person behind me. Sorry, I do. Because I've already said hello to them. And I suggested, you'll just have to put up with me, that's all. I suggested we looked around and said something like Paul said the other day, have a look around. Have a look around. Look at us. Look at us. See many wise here? Clever? Let's get things in perspective. Let's not look in the mirror and think how wonderful we are. I think, Wendy, you prayed something like this morning. We are nothing. Without God, nothing. And he says this, "For you see your calling, brethren." Let's apply this to us. You see your calling, Shirley Community Church. Not many wise, according to the flesh. Not many mighty. Not many noble. I don't think we've got any nobility here at all, have we? No one related in some distant way to the royal family or to the aristocracy. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things of the mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised God has chosen. And the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. Some of you will know about the Countess of Huntingdon, who was saved in the 18th century. She was a member of the aristocracy, and she linked up with Wesley and Whitfield. She said, "I was saved by the letter M." That's what she said. Blessed be God. It does not say, this is what she said, any mighty, any noble. It says many mighty, many noble. I owe my salvation to the letter M. Now, who in the name of wisdom would have chosen you? Or me? Who in the name of wisdom would have elected us to become the children of God? Who in the name of wisdom would have bothered or even thought about it? And who in the name of wisdom would have chosen the crucifixion of the Messiah to be the very epitome of wisdom? Who? God himself. Who in the name of wisdom would say that the crucifixion of the Messiah would be the ability for you and I to be redeemed? It seems so absurd. It seems so foolish. Thankfully, it's not. Paul said this, chapter 2, verse 1, "And I, brethren, came to you. When I came to you, did not come with excellency of speech or of wisdom, declaring to you the testimony of God. For I determined not to know anything among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." That's all I want to know about, he says. And now I know he spoke of other things, but at the root of those things was Jesus Christ and him crucified. "And I came to you in weakness, in fear, and in much trembling." You remember what they said about him? What a pathetic speaker. Yeah. What a pathetic speaker. You know how Spurgeon was saved, do you? Do you know the great Spurgeon? You know the story of him? Well, it was snowing and he couldn't get to church. And he went into a little mission. And the man standing there was not the preacher of the day because the snow had kept him away. And he fumbled and mumbled and barely got a word out. Spurgeon was saved. Hallelujah. That's the power of God. Someone mentioned on I'm looking around, she's not here this morning, she won't mind me saying it. She mentioned about eloquence. She confessed to the Lord that she was not eloquent as we are. I said to her afterwards, you forget that. God's not interested in eloquence. God's interested in what emanates from the heart. Even if it's not possible to put it into words. It's that which comes from the heart. It might just be oh God, be merciful to me. Yeah? Like that woman who came to him, you remember? Her daughter was demon-possessed. And Jesus said, it's not good for thee to give to the dogs, the Gentiles. She carried on. Help me, she said. That's why I say this morning, if you're suffering, if you're struggling, don't give up. Help, Lord, help. And he did. He did. Now, you know that God doesn't need us, don't you? He doesn't need you. He doesn't need me. He doesn't need our advice. He doesn't need our strategy to build a church. He doesn't need any of that. Why should God require our strategy? Why should God require anything that we can offer him in order to build his church, other than to be faithful in the preaching of this cross? You know, God's people were in exile, and in Isaiah he writes this, who has measured, this is God speaking, I love to apply these things to myself. Ask yourself this, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, measured heaven with a span and calculated the dust of the earth? Perhaps that's where Archimedes was thinking about, I don't know. Weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance. Have you? No. Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord? Who has counseled him? Whom does he take counsel? Who has instructed him and taught him? And then, you know, that lovely scripture in Job when God says, the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Prepare yourself like a man. I will question you. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Now, when I read these things, I just want to kneel before God and say, yes, what a pitiful creature I am. And you've somehow, in your great grace and love, chosen us and redeemed us. It's utter foolishness to the world, but it's the wisdom of God. The cross is the wisdom of God. It's the very zenith of the wisdom of God, this cross. You see, God has made man in his own image, and ever since, man is trying to create God in his image, and as a result, he worships himself. So there are these two groups of people. The Jews request a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. Well, you want a sign? It's the cross. It's the cross of Christ. You want wisdom? It's the cross of Christ. There it is. Now, the world is looking for signs. I've been in churches where there's been a great emphasis on signs and wonders. Oh, if there are signs and wonders that people will pour in. Oh, really? Now, I'll come onto this in a moment. That's not the way. I believe in signs and wonders and I pray for them. But that's the wrong order. Remember what Jesus, it was the same in the New Testament. Jesus' brothers said, John 7, depart from here, go into Judea that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. For no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. For even his brothers did not believe in him. Remember Satan suggested that Jesus throw himself off the pinnacle of the temple, and his angels will give charge. They'll all come running when they see that you've been protected. And then on the cross, you remember what they said? You who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. Hallelujah, he didn't, though he could have done. You see, to the Jews, this was a stumbling block. I wonder if behind me this morning, instead of a nice shiny cross, which of course it wasn't, you saw an electric chair. Have a think for a moment and I'll come back to it. You see, the cross has become a religious symbol. It's become a religious symbol. It was nothing like that. To the Jews, it was a stumbling block. It was an absolute scandal. It was an absurdity. You got crucified for one of two reasons. You were either an insurgent or you were a runaway slave. That's why they put over the cross of Jesus, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. This is what happens if you say you're the King of the Jews. This is what happens if you're an insurgent. This is what happens if you pretend to be something. The Jews expected deliverance like the Exodus days. They expected the Messiah to come along and deliver them from the Romans. That's what they expected. And what is on a cross? The most ignominious, the most awful form of punishment, the lowest of the low. God crucified on a cross. As I say, it seems quite a noble symbol. Please, I'm not having a go at crosses. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying this morning. That doesn't trouble me at all. But it's not an accurate depiction of the cross at all. It was a rough-hewn tree on which Jesus carried it on his back and was splintered beyond measure, possibly before he even arrived at Golgotha. You see, you might as well have said to the Jews, this is the message of the electric chair. Are you following me? You might as well have said that. Except the electric chair, of course, hadn't been invented, and it was far more acceptable, or would have been, than this awful cross and this way of crucifixion. Paul in Greece, you remember, was expected to propound some new wisdom. And what does he say? I think I was listening to David's sermon a few weeks ago in which he said this. God commands all people everywhere to repent. That was his message. They were waiting for this new wisdom. This wonderful new wisdom that the Greeks always wanted. But he comes along and they said he's a babbler. Now that actually means a seed picker. If you look around occasionally, you'll see homeless people walking around bins trying to find food or fag ends. That's the meaning. That's how they put him. They said he's a babbler. He's a seed picker. I've said, and I'm almost through, there is a great emphasis in certain circles on signs and wonders. And I think it's true that in New Testament days, the signs and wonders often authenticated the preaching of the gospel. But people sought them for the wrong reasons. An evil and adulterous generation, says Jesus, seeks after a sign. John tells us at the end of chapter 2, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he did, but he did not commit himself to them. That's what he said. When Jesus fed the 5,000, they wanted to follow him for his food multiplying ability. And then you find this in Peter and John in Acts 4. Lord, look upon their threats and grant to thy servants to speak the word with boldness while you stretch out your hand to heal, and signs and wonders are performed through the name of your holy servant Jesus. Did you notice what was first? The word. Speak the word. Speak the word. Let this be our mantra in this church. Speak the word. Speak the word. Let God do the rest. Speak the word. Let him do the saving. We can't do it. Let him perform the miracles. We can't do it. Let him do the healing. We can't do it. Speak the word and grant that signs and wonders will follow. Having said all that, I just want to give a little personal testimony about the way God sometimes speaks to us in signs. In my case, when I was down and out and looking for an answer and decided to cut my Bible, look for a verse. Have you done that? Oh, no, just me, is it? Okay. You're so spiritual here. There's we don't use these terms, thankfully. I don't like them much. Exegesis is when you look at a passage of Scripture and you work out who said it, to whom it said, what were the circumstances of the day, and what it meant to those who heard it. Hermeneutics is to take that and bring it into the 21st century. All right? Now, here is the worst hermeneutic you have ever heard in your life. Because I was articled to a firm called Highway and Sons, and they were a very old company, 100 years old, in Edgbaston, and I decided to go and do criminal law and finish my articles in Ilkeston in Derbyshire. And we decided to come back. Every article clerk there fell out with the bosses, and it was a terrible mess. And we came back to Birmingham, and I got a job with a firm of solicitors right opposite Highway and Sons. And I was asked to go into court with all manner of things that weren't quite right. And I was desperate and sat at my desk and said, Lord, please show me something. And I opened my Bible, and this is what it said. A highway shall be there, and a road, and it shall be called the highway of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for others. Whoever walks the road, although a fool, shall not go astray. No lion shall be there, nor any ravenous beast go up. It shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And I went straight over to my old firm, where they offered me a partnership. That is the worst hermeneutic I've ever heard. But God's gracious. He's gracious. He looks at a young man who's struggling, and he's gracious, filled with love. Hallelujah. Let's finish. Why can't people handle the preaching of the cross? Because it reveals sin, doesn't it? It requires you and me to admit that we're dead in trespasses and sins, and leaves two alternatives. Either God is right or we are right. It declares the only way to be saved is by God's free gift of grace. How could God get these rebellious people on his side without forcing them? I'm glad he doesn't force us. Can you imagine him forcing us? We're still in our chains. We don't want to be there. But he pities us. He sees us. And he wants us to change side. Now, when Jesus was on the earth, they could not tolerate this wonderful man. What could you find against him? He was kind. He was generous. He performed miracles. He spoke well. He was glorious. And yet they nailed him to a cross. Now, if that's not the zenith of the rebellion of man, I don't know what is. They take this beautiful man, this glorious man, this wonderful man, to whom you could ascribe or attribute nothing bad, and man puts him on a cross. That is the zenith of the rebellion of men, that is in us and in our capability. Now, what can you do with a God who loves like that. You can't kill him anymore. That's already been done. The only thing you can really do is, well, there are two things you can do. You can either run to him or you can run away from him. And if you run away from him, you discover that he pursues you. Did you discover that? If you run away from him, he pursues you. That's how gracious he is. And he'll bring your circumstances to such a place that you'll cry out to him. Hallelujah. The tragedy is that when people come to those circumstances, they don't cry out to him, but he'll bring them there. He'll pursue them. If I be lifted up, he said, it says there in the scriptures, he's talking about his cross, I will draw all men unto me. No man or woman will have an excuse on that great day of judgment. And we know that lovely story of the prodigal son, how he came back to his father, and his father ran and welcomed him back. I've finished. You know, the great danger of the day is to become acceptable to the secular culture. And that's what's happening in lots of places. No one wants to be considered a fool. No one wants to be considered weak. But Paul says, listen, congregation, I'm with you in this weakness. I'm with you. The world laughs, it's hostile, and considers us fool. Yet it's an honor to be a fool for Christ, isn't it? It's an honor. So as we go forward, let's preach this cross with the illumination of the Holy Spirit, bringing to men and women the great power of God. Amen. Let's pray. Then we'll sing a hymn. Father, thank you for the simplicity of this gospel that even a child can understand. Thank you, Lord, that the receiving of your word is not rooted in intellectual things, Lord, though you want us to use our minds. We understand that. But, Lord, it's a matter of the heart to run to you, to say yes to you. We would, like all the others, have cried, crucify him. But this morning, Lord, we've been singing, crown him with many crowns. Thank you for revealing yourself to us, Lord. Continue with us. Give us all we need, Lord, to preach Jesus Christ and him crucified. In his name, amen.